Back when I was just a wee lad in high school, there were dozens of sites cutting about where you could find low resolution, poorly lettered scans of the latest manga releases from Japan. Manga and anime weren't nearly as popular as they are nowadays, so outside of your Dragon Ball Zs and your Narutos, these sites were pretty much the only way you were going to discover some of the more obscure shit. Like Dragon Half, which was basically just pornography, and To Love Ru, which was basically just pornography. Now, you'll all know me as the mad shagger that I am, but believe it or not, even I've got a sensitive side. And it was while trawling through one of these sites that I discovered one of my favourite manga, Mysterious Girlfriend X. Stop laughing.
Baby girl, shine like a looking glass.
Oh, mysterious girl, I wanna get close to you.
Mysterious Girlfriend X, objectively speaking, all sounds pretty damn stupid. And that's no me talking, that is author Ueshiba Richi wrapping the comic up after having spent a decade on it. The series follows the relationship between Tsubaki Akira and Urabe Mikoto, the titular mysterious girlfriend. The pair form a deep psychic connection, an intimate bond where they can communicate empathically by feeding one another their drool. Now this is a point where I think a lot of people roll their eyes and go, "Oh, Japan," when I think it's really effective imagery. It is the same kind of euphemism as, for example, using a bloody nose to communicate arousal. The bloody nose is not a non sequitur. Your blood pressure rises when you are aroused, and a nosebleed is the perfect way to display that within the limitations of a heavily censored manga. In other words, I don't think it was a bloody nose that Tsubaki was covering up by staying in the water. Drool, blood, and even sweat are all used to create a robust visual language. There's obviously a sexual component to the drool swapping ritual, driven home by the thinly veiled orgasm imagery when, in moments of rapture, Urabe's drool spills out of her mouth. By exchanging the bodily fluids that it can't show with the ones that it can, the manga can communicate the slightly gross, slightly awkward sexual component of this adolescent relationship. It creates its own language of attraction, allowing the characters to display their affection rather than just explain it. And this allows the manga to portray some fairly complex emotions relating to sexuality. In a lot of media, and manga especially, desire is treated like the antithesis of legitimate emotion. The antics of the designated pervert are almost always a parenthetical moment of comic relief. They act like a creep, they get punished for it, and with the joke concluded, the story can continue. Mysterious Girlfriend X instead treats desire as a part of the character's emotional spectra. Fancying someone can be funny, just like it can in real life, but that doesn't illegitimize the rest of their emotions. Tsubaki's wet dream about his girlfriend is almost cozy. There's a quiet thrill to this private experience. It's not a joke, and it's certainly not for titillation. It takes the form of a frank statement on a black background. It's a characterful moment, showing his awkward attraction towards his girlfriend. And she reciprocates. Urabe has an active sexual imagination as well, finding herself in the exact same position when their roles are reversed. They are both slightly ashamed and slightly excited by these feelings. There's an emotional range to being aroused, and that is illustrated through their weird romantic gestures. With those emotions, of course, come anxieties. The scissors that Urabe keeps tucked away in her underwear are used to repel Tsubaki when he oversteps his mark. I keep a pair of scissors tucked away in my underwear as well, and that's why I've no longer got a penis. Sex and danger are closely associated in the adolescent mind. There are consequences if Tsubaki crosses the line. His girlfriend's anger presents an emotional danger, which is manifested in a visual medium as a physical danger. But the scissors don't just represent Tsubaki's anxieties, they represent Urabe's as well. The threat is empty. She nicks him with the scissors once, and the resulting guilt is the focus of an entire chapter. She doesn't want to hurt him, she just doesn't want him to hurt her. She isn't distant because she is a stereotypical ice queen for Tsubaki to thaw, but because she's shy. The pubescent fascination with the opposite sex goes hand in hand with self-consciousness about one's own body. Their displays of affection are tentative and often fleeting, reflecting how nervous they are around one another. These sexual aspects are an integral part of the manga and its themes. And when it comes to manga, that is a sentence that often makes me nervous. I have been blindsided one too many times by some greasy creep trying to diddle his sister. But what I really appreciate about Mysterious Girlfriend X is that the treatment of these subjects is relatively respectful throughout. The sexual elements are often either abstracted through bizarre euphemism or framed without leering. Nudity is outlined rather than detailed, naked bodies become a blank canvas. I mean, I still wouldn't read it on the bus, but it means that the manga never becomes repulsive, even when it's being tiresome. More on that later. While the manga isn't terribly sophisticated in terms of framing or layout, a lot of time and attention has been paid to the backgrounds. The penmanship is very loose, evidenced by the blotting where the lines overlap, which can be seen even in the panel borders. It's got a relaxed air, but that's not to say that it's lazy. The lines are precise and measured and meticulous, but they're feathered with the same breeziness throughout. It's obvious that Ueshiba was in complete control of his aesthetic. Look at how muggy this scene is. The sun's rays are thin and sharp, angling their way down into the room to show that the day is at its zenith, creating thick shadows on the ceiling. Meanwhile, the cherry blossoms aren't outlined at all, but instead defined by the lack of screen tone, the perfect way to render their ethereal, airy quality. Entire sequences of panels are dedicated to creating the sense of time passing, not just setting a static scene, but showing how time is changing. A lot of the story is told through these backgrounds. They offer little bits of insight into the characters and their interests. Tsubaki's room is filled with toys and figurines, but they're all bundled away in drawers and shelves and they're never talked about, which gives me the impression that he has recently grown out of them. More prominently though, the backgrounds are used to mark the changes in the times of the characters' lives. Cherry blossoms in the spring slide naturally into the legally mandated beach chapter in the summer, and then follows the slow onset of winter. And these changes are reflected on the characters. Everything from the outfits that they wear, to the food that they eat, to the holidays that they celebrate, even the stories of the chapters themselves, they all root the characters in their surroundings. In other words, the manga is very good at pathetic fallacy. Pathetic fallacy is the term for attributing sympathetic qualities to animals, nature and objects. The term was coined by prominent Victorian critic John Ruskin to criticise the overly sentimental poetry of his time. Because the poetry was so overcome with emotion, Ruskin argued, it failed to accurately reflect reality. While rain can make us feel sad, it cannot itself be sad, and saying that it can is false, pathetic fallacy. Now, I disagree. I think that pathetic fallacy can be a really useful technique, which is why I have prepared this robust and well-reasoned academic response to justify factoring it into my analysis. Get it up, you Ruskin. In traditional Japanese aesthetics, there isn't so large a gap between the subjective and the objective. Honi is a term for an item's essential implication. There's an inherent emotional connotation to certain images. And indeed, Tsubaki and Urabe's relationship is entangled in the imagery that they are surrounded by. Cherry Blossom's Honi is, as you probably know, ephemerality, they are delicate and short-lived. They also herald the coming of spring, indicating fertility and life, and furthermore they're associated in Japanese culture with growing up. They bloom in March when school graduation ceremonies are held. So when a cherry blossom attaches itself to Urabi's underwear, it is applying those themes to that character. The pink of the blossom on the white of her underwear isn't the most subtle menstruation imagery, but through this single picture, the manga is able to communicate a great many themes of time moving on, of Urabi growing up, and of cycles, both annual and monthly, shall we say. It's pathetic fallacy. The cherry blossoms mimic Urabi's state, the backgrounds reflect the characters. It gives the manga a very transient feel. It deals in indistinct impressions rather than a material continuity, a sensation that is strengthened by the fact that the characters go through a good few years as 17-year-olds. And a lot of these opaque impressions are imparted via the artwork, they aren't made tangible through explanation.
What?
The feelings shared between the two are images rather than specific, complex ideas. You couldn't create this impression with words alone. There is a Japanese term for the awareness and acceptance of transience. It's mono no aware, which isn't to be confused with mono no aware, which is when you've been kissing too many girls and you don't know why you have a sore throat. Mono no aware is generally translated as the pathos of things. While the history of the phrase is a bit more complicated, in its most common form it is taken as a sensitivity towards the transient nature of life. It's not quite happiness with the transience of life, it's kind of the opposite. It's a wistfulness, a sadness that this too will pass, but it's also recognising the beauty in that sadness. Places and people and moments become more precious when you know that they aren't going to last forever. And I think that the sadness of that awareness is tinged with at least a little happiness that you get to experience those places and people and moments now. It's a sensation that tints the whole of the manga, but it really comes into focus during the incredible finale, Mysterious Sunset. Tsubaki's mother died and his sister's romantic life ended after high school, and both of those events are only so sad because the relationships meant so much. They were beautiful and they were important and they ended. But this has a bittersweet weight to it because those wounds have long since healed. It's been so long that Tsubaki has forgotten what his mum looked like. It's been so long that he has had time to outgrow his sister, 7 years his senior. Their mother's absence, what was once a traumatic change for the family, is now routine. But that isn't at all a nihilistic realisation. There's a running event throughout the manga of Urabi being reluctant to let Tsubaki take photos of her. She seems to consider them almost artificial. Photography creates a perfect, static image to idolise rather than an imperfect, volatile, real person. So, when Urabi offers to keep the last picture of Tsubaki's mother until he is ready to see it, it's a really lovely gesture. What I think she's saying with this is that he is going to want to remember his mother at some point, but he's never going to need a photo to remember Urabi. Because Mono no Aware isn't just reminiscing about how things have changed, part of it is an understanding that things are going to continue to change. Tsubaki has changed since he knew his mother, and the couple are going to change further in the future. And it is over this realisation that the pair finally decide not to share the kiss that the manga's been teasing for the last 93 chapters. Mysterious Girlfriend X could have ended with the big kiss and I wouldn't have raised an eyebrow, but this is such a perfect ending, because sharing a kiss would mean the end of the pair's drool swapping ritual. Their silly little routine has become something that Tsubaki cherishes. The pair are currently at the point that his sister can't return to. She can no longer feel the confusing allure of a high school romance. She cannot see those beautiful sunsets. But while the sunset is an ending, it also heralds the sunrise. A new day will dawn and change will come. And when it does, they're not going to be able to go back to the way they are now. So why not cherish that while they have it? The whole manga takes place within a snapshot of these characters' lives, and it leaves you with the wistful impression that all things must come to an end right before it ends. It's cruel and it's beautiful and I love it. The title Mysterious Girlfriend X was inspired by the 1970s Jerry Anderson series UFO, which was called Mysterious Flying Saucer UFO in Japan, a name that is much easier to Google. As such, the paranormal is a subtle theme throughout the manga, particularly at the beginning when Urabi's habits are so alien to us. Her parents are never seen, she has superhuman speed and accuracy with her scissors, and of course there's that whole thing about the psychic drool powers, that's kinda weird as well. But after reading it for a while, you kind of forget just how idiosyncratic this character is. And that's when you realise that the first answer we were given was the correct one. She's just a bit of a weirdo. None of it needs explaining. And that might seem like a bit of a cop-out, but I think that it's an actively incredible reason. Urabi is mysterious insofar as people are mysterious before you get to know them. The metallic whiff of science fiction fades as Urabi becomes more knowable, both to Tsubaki and to the reader. The manga's focus clearly shifts as it goes on, a fact that it practically admits in the movie production arc. The mysterious movie production is Mysterious Girlfriend X's way of holding a mirror to itself. The director, Matsuzama, reaches the same idea for a story that Ueshiba did. She thought it was cute when a girl falls asleep and drools. Through her, the manga is taking a recursive look at its own ideas. So when the movie ends with the sci-fi premise overpowered by Tsubaki and Urabi's love for one another, the manga is demonstrating how its priorities have changed. And not just narrative priorities either, it seems to take umbrage with some of its past conduct. Now, I kinda need to preface this by admitting that the comic isn't perfect. Sure, problematic shit kinda comes with the territory, but it's still problematic shit, you know? I mean, I've managed to rationalise them to myself, but let's be honest, we all know the real reason that the panty scissors are there. The manga seems to lose faith in itself around the middle especially. There is an absolutely rancid idol saga that falls headlong into traps that the series otherwise manages to avoid. I might be reaching too far to defend it, but it's such a jarring shift in both tone and direction that I don't wonder if it wasn't editorially mandated or something. So, when the movie's director literally contrives a reason to have the female lead topless and have Tsubaki walk in on her, and they then draw attention to how cynical that is upon the reflective surface of fiction within fiction, it's difficult not to read that as the manga being critical of itself. Tsubaki is evidently uncomfortable with all of this. Earlier in the manga, he would see a nudity and get slapped, the secret dream of every masochist. But here, there are lingering social consequences. It feels like the comic is admitting fault. It feels like it's changed its ideas on how to portray sexuality. These themes of change and sexuality come to define the relationship between the two protagonists. Urabi's odd quirks that seem really weird and alien at first become familiar as you keep reading. Intimate acts that are clumsy and nerve-wracking at the beginning become more casual. Their idiosyncratic drool swapping ritual becomes a literal routine. They learn to laugh at one another with the silliness of their romantic gestures laid bare. And while they do worry about losing the thrill of a new relationship, they also grow visibly closer. It matures into a healthy relationship in a very authentic way. And this is the best bit of the manga for me, the bit where at the end all of the tropes and contrivances just fall away, and the pair are just left being comfortable with one another. Not because I'm a paragon of virtue or anything like that, but because that's the point where the manga feels the most comfortable with itself as well. The comic that started with Urabe proclaiming that Tsubaki would be the first man she'd have sex with ended without so much as a kiss. The comic that started with the mystery of the mysterious girlfriend ended without a cheap resolution. Because, in a good way, Mysterious Girlfriend X is a stupid manga. The drool swapping ritual is stupid, but it gains its own legitimacy as a romantic gesture because it means a lot to these two characters. The panty scissors are stupid, but they almost become a gauge for the relationship, appearing less and less as the two grow closer. Objectively speaking, Mysterious Girlfriend X does all sound pretty damn stupid. It sounds really damn stupid, but it's at the end when it embraces that stupidity that it can see itself through on its own terms. This particular volume came from the Ballyrowan Branch Library in South Dublin, and as you can see, I was going to throw away this checkout card until I realised that not one person, not a single person, checked it out in the entire time it was there. The fuck's wrong with you, Dublin?